A&E's American Justice has been brought to you in part by Buick and your local dealers. Remember Buick, the new symbol for quality in America.
You've always made a great team. Together growing, dreaming, caring, and sharing the rewards along the way. Park Avenue. For the comfort, for the luxury, for the quality. Congratulations, you've earned it. Buick Park Avenue.
Miami's South Beach is a photographer's paradise. Ask Irene Marie. Her models appear in magazines all over the world. But when her modeling agency needs office products, she calls the biggest star of all, Office Depot. From Canada to Florida, nobody guarantees lower prices than Office Depot. Nobody.
Okay, that's a wrap. Take care of business with the pros at Office Depot.
Next, make time for all the milestone moments you missed.
The people who have shaped our memories, the events that have shaped the world, the stories behind the lead on the evening news.
Watch the 20th Century with Mike Wallace on A&E. Next.
A friend of mine told me, try America Online. I said, why? I've got a computer. He said, try it. You'll see. It's simple. Every time you sign on,
welcome.
It tells you if you've got mail.
You've got mail.
Want to send some email? Type the message, click here, and it's done. I like this. With one click, I can browse all kinds of great features on America Online. I've gotten help with my golf swing, I've planned my next vacation, even get stock price updates every 15 minutes. America Online has over 100 newspapers and magazines, everything from Business Week Online to Cycle World, and I can browse them all. With America Online, you can point and click your way across the internet. And their web browser makes it easy to explore the World Wide Web. Call the toll-free number and you'll receive your free startup kit and 10 free hours to look around. It's worth a try. You'll see.
To try America Online free, call 1-800-214-0044. You'll receive your free America Online startup kit and 10 free hours your first month. Call now.
A biography special. The real performers.
Pat doesn't have a mink coat.
The Democrats say they have no idea who would want to spy on them.
It's the stuff that movies are made of. The very real life of President Richard Nixon on an all-new biography. Sunday at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific, only on A&E.
A&E's The 20th Century is brought to you in part by American Airlines. Something special in the air.
Now, on the 20th Century, two enduring mysteries. The search for Jimmy Hoffa and Howard Hughes. July 30th, 1975. Labor boss James Hoffa leaves his suburban Detroit home to have lunch at a favorite restaurant. At some point that afternoon, he disappears and is never seen again. 8 months later, the eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes dies on a flight from Mexico to Houston, thus ending a bizarre life that was shrouded in mystery. Two forceful, power-hungry men who, for all of their differences, had one thing in common. They left behind a legacy of unanswered questions. I'm Mike Wallace, and this is the 20th Century. At the time of his disappearance, Jimmy Hoffa was making a determined effort to repair his damaged reputation. Among other things, he had to cope with the stigma of being an ex-convict who had close associations with organized crime. He had served nearly 5 years in federal prison for felonies committed during his reign as president of the Teamsters, the nation's largest and most powerful labor union.
He was a fantastically popular and respected labor leader. No labor leader ever in all of American history has had the combination of adulation from the rank and file and respect from the employers that Jimmy Hoffa had.
A majority of Teamsters support Hoffa.
not out of fear or coercion, but because he delivers what they want, an upward spiral of material benefits.
His legal troubles dated back to the late 1950s, when the Senate Labor Committee, with Bobby Kennedy as chief counsel, began to investigate reported Teamster ties to organized crime.
You've got people in Detroit, at least 15 who have police records. You've got Joey Glimko in Chicago. I say you're not tough enough to get rid of these people then.
Well, I don't propose to
You haven't
be
moved
tough.
against any of them.
I don't propose to act tough. I don't frighten too easy.
Well, you're not
and I don't intend to have the impression left that's been stated publicly that I'm controlled by gangsters. I am not controlled by them.
You got witnesses to what happened
And
there?
in fact, today, many believe that Hoffa's ties to organized crime were not that extensive.
Hoffa could say yes to the mob. Again, it was that pragmatism. You do what you have to do. And as he rose to the top, became head of just under 1,000 Teamster locals in all 50 states, he had to make, he said, mob liaisons, which indeed he did if he hoped to rise to the top. It's hard to quantify, but approximately 50 of the almost 1,000 Teamster locals in Hoffa's day had some visible, significant mob infiltration.
There are those who will tell you that Hoffa is a racket man, that Hoffa is part of the underworld. They have tried to arouse, if you will, a revolution with this international union. First with the hearings before the McClellan Committee, and little Bobby Kennedy, and all of those individuals. And all those individuals who had used the great power of the Senate of the United States to destroy this international union.
As chief counsel for the McClellan Committee, Kennedy was the point man for the investigation, and the bitter antagonism he and Hoffa felt toward each other continued into the 1960s. First, when Kennedy served as Attorney General, and then later as a senator from New York.
Did Robert Kennedy strike you as a good candidate?
He wasn't a good Attorney General. In all probability, a worse senator. I would hate to think what would happen if he became President of the United States. We'd probably have a fascist government.
Why do you feel that Mr. Kennedy has seemed to have taken a personal interest in you, sir?
First of all, to promote his own personal ambitions, and secondly, because he is a spoiled brat who believes that everybody must kowtow to him and allow him to dictate the policy. When we rejected him dictating policy, the Teamsters International Union, he took it as a personal affront, made it his business to try and destroy this international union.
By this time, Hoffa was up to his neck in legal problems. He had already been convicted of jury tampering, of trying to bribe a juror, and had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for that offense. And then, while that verdict was being appealed, Hoffa was hauled into federal court in Chicago to face allegations of conspiracy for mail and wire fraud.
Don't you feel, Mr. Hoffa, that all these court appearances in your time takes time away from your job?
There's 24 hours in the day, as you well know, as reporters, and what you don't do at a particular moment, you do just a little longer during that day.
Mr. Hoffa, it's been suggested that if you should meet reverses in the court, you're prepared to run the Teamsters Union from jail. Is it true?
I have no comment concerning that since it involves this trial and other trials.
Will you be running for re-election in '66?
I certainly will.
Hoffa was found guilty of the wire and mail fraud charges, and so he began serving what would turn out to be a 13-year sentence in March of 1967.
This will be James R. Hoffa's home for a while at the United States Northeastern Penitentiary at Lewisburg, Pennsylvania.
During his first 4 years in prison, he continued to run the Union through his longtime friend, Deputy Frank Fitzsimmons, who had the title of acting president. Finally, in June of 1971, Hoffa turned the Union over to Fitzsimmons.
I wish to announce that Jimmy Hoffa has determined that he will not be a candidate for re-election. In withdrawing, Hoffa has endorsed my candidacy for the general presidency.
Then later that year, just a few days before Christmas, President Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence. After 4 years, 9 months, and 16 days in prison, Jimmy Hoffa was once again a free man.
What happens next? What about the leadership in the Teamsters Union?
Leadership is in good hands under Frank Fitzsimmons and will continue that way.
That was in 1971. Later, it was revealed that as a condition for his parole, Hoffa was forbidden to take an active role in union affairs until 1980. But it wasn't long before Hoffa went to court to challenge that restriction.
He apparently would have succeeded, had he lived, in getting his parole restriction rescinded in 1975, allowing him to run for the Teamster presidency in 1976. He was so enormously popular that he would have sailed back into that job. And the mob did not want Hoffa back. Fitz was their man. He was compliant. He was a peanut butter sandwich, as they used to call him. He preferred to play golf and go to White House functions. Richard Nixon called Fitzsimmons his favorite labor leader. And the mob did not want Hoffa back.
Some men might worry about being out of favor with organized crime, but not Jimmy Hoffa. In 1975, he was interviewed by Jerry Stanicky for Playboy magazine, and it turned out to be Hoffa's last interview.
Did you ever have any bodyguards?
Don't need them. In your way.
Well, everybody doesn't love Jimmy Hoffa.
I'm not interested in what everybody does. When you get a bodyguard, you become careless, and if you look at all the gangsters who were killed with bodyguards, you'll never went to sleep. I don't care to go to sleep. The only guy who needs a bodyguard is a liar, cheat, a guy who betrays friendship, or a guy who is in some kind of a business deal and cheats his partner. What the hell else you need a bodyguard for? And I don't do any one of them.
How about fear?
Fear what?
You afraid of anything?
Well, am I going to be afraid of? I'm 62 years old. I should have been dead maybe 25 years ago, lived 3 lives. Well, what am I going to get afraid of? Never was afraid of my life, and I'm intending to start tomorrow. Who's going to bother me? If they do, well, then I'll do something about that. Hell, I had people try to kill me. I survived it. Didn't have no bodyguard, but I survived the threat of being killed, an attempt to be killed. I'm still here.
But not for long. On July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa vanished from the face of the earth.
1 o'clock in the afternoon last Wednesday, Jimmy Hoffa pulled out of the driveway of his modest home on Lake Orion and headed south toward Detroit. At 2 p.m., Hoffa was to have met someone in the parking lot of this suburban restaurant 15 miles away. At 2:30, he called his wife, said the party hadn't shown up, and that he would be home by 4 p.m. 2 men later told police that they had seen and casually greeted Hoffa in this restaurant parking lot between 1:30 and 2:30 Wednesday. No one apparently has seen him since.
He was, in fact, never seen again. The long search for Jimmy Hoffa and the mobsters who may have killed him when the 20th century continues.
Last year, I flew 250,000 miles. Most people would find that exhausting, but it's different for me. I don't have business in New York or LA. The trip itself is my business. And whether it's business travelers or people who fly just once a year.
The captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt.
That flight is a big part of what makes a trip good or bad. And a good flight isn't the same for everybody. Some are looking to work. Some just want to relax. And some, they just want to get away. And knowing the difference, well, that comes with flying 250,000 miles and seeing 1,000 different faces.
This is a gold card. It can't grant you inner peace. I don't know. No card on the planet's more accepted, so you could go someplace peaceful. And with a credit line of at least $5,000, you'll have the freedom to relax. And freedom like that might be the path of true wisdom. So I guess Gold MasterCard can help you to see the light. Just remember to wear sunscreen. Gold MasterCard. It's more than a gold card. It's smart money. Look for your Gold MasterCard application and apply today.
22 minutes, 16 seconds past the hour.
Nice guy, James. His name's William.
A familiar face. A morning smile. An extra step.
Britain's
down, but he got here anyway, didn't he? Mine's at this moment, the people of FedEx are using their know-how, determination, and heart to treat your package as if it were the most important package of all, because to them, that's exactly what it is.
James, such a nice boy. He is a nice boy, but his name's William.
For all of his reputation as a ruthless tough guy who consorted with the mob, in his private life, Hoffa was a devoted family man. Thus, when he failed to come home that night in 1975, his family immediately began to fear the worst.
My dad would never, ever stay away from my mother, not call her or tell her what was going on unless he was prevented from doing so.
Hoffa's son, James, an attorney, said today he believes his father was abducted, but that he had no idea by whom. He did not discount Union politics as one possible reason.
Anybody looking at the situation would have certainly considered that is a possibility, although at this point we have no evidence.
He was absolutely fearless and absolutely dedicated, and he had one mind to return to the Union.
As the weeks passed that summer with still no sign of Hoffa's whereabouts, family and friends began to face the inevitable conclusion.
At that point in time, after 2 or 3 weeks, we didn't know who had done it, but we knew he would not be back.
Jimmy Hoffa's chief personal counsel, Morris Schenker, the man who negotiated his early release from federal prison, is afraid Hoffa is dead.
But I just can't conceive with Jimmy Hoffa being alive. With his charm and his abilities, I think if he was alive, he'd talk himself out of it.
James P. Hoffa said today he's given up all hope that his father, the one-time Teamsters boss, is still alive.
At this late date, after the time that's gone by, I think that it's clear that my father has been assassinated and that we're probably never going to see him again or find the body.
And to make matters worse, there were indications that Hoffa had been betrayed by his foster son, Charles Chucky O'Brien.
Hoffa's family today kept up the pressure on Charles Chucky O'Brien, Hoffa's so-called foster son, regarded as one of the central figures in the case. Hoffa's son, James, says O'Brien refused to talk to him about Hoffa's disappearance, and that he believes O'Brien has something to hide.
I would just say that his activities are suspicious and unexplained, and he was in the area of the Red Fox restaurant at the time my dad was abducted, and I'll leave it to the authorities to look that up.
Mr. Hoffa, do you believe that Chucky O'Brien is covering up facts in this case?
Yes.
Hoffa's son had reason to be suspicious, for O'Brien was known to have close ties to a powerful figure in the Detroit underworld.
FBI agents carrying a warrant seized an automobile in the early morning hours at the residence of Anthony Giacalone, reputed Detroit mafia boss. The car, which belongs to Giacalone's son, was being driven by Charles Chucky O'Brien, a man known as Hoffa's foster son, the day Hoffa vanished. O'Brien has admitted being in the vicinity of the suburban shopping center where Hoffa was last seen that day. Sources say the car was picked up because there are bloodstains in it. But O'Brien told newsmen last week he had carried a large, fresh fish packed in ice to the home of a Teamster official. That may account for the bloodstains. O'Brien would say nothing today.
But when he did talk, he said he was innocent.
Who killed Jimmy Hoffa?
I couldn't answer that because I don't know.
Will they ever find him?
I don't know.
There's a lot of things said and a lot of confusion really about your relationship with Jimmy Hoffa. Was it more than a foster son? Were you like a real son to him?
He was like a father to me. There's no question about that. That he saw through me a son that was in the labor movement, because young Jim was never interested in labor movement. My relationship was as a foster son, okay?
But according to Jimmy Hoffa's wife, Josephine, O'Brien had been something less than a caring and attentive son, especially during the weeks of anguish following her husband's disappearance.
You and your husband took in Chucky O'Brien and made him almost a part of your family. Have you heard from him since?
No.
Not a word.
I haven't seen him, and I haven't heard from him.
Isn't that strange?
Oh, Chucky, he's here today and gone tomorrow. Could never find him when you needed him.
You say you're very close to the family, and there's Josephine Hoffa at home, distraught that day. And yet, when he disappeared, you didn't show up to see her. And when I spoke to her, and she said, well, you know, Chucky, here today, gone tomorrow.
Well, don't forget, you were talking to a fine lady who was under a tremendous stress.
Well, why would young Jimmy Hoffa's son, his real son, why would he say Chucky O'Brien's involved?
Well, at that point, his emotions were running high. And I said, look, Jimmy, I said, there are different kind of people that are going to talk to you, and there are people who are going to accuse people, and they're going to say things. He continued to argue with me, and he said, I think you know more about this than what you're talking about. I said, Jimmy, I'm going to pretend like I didn't hear that.
Although O'Brien was never charged in Hoffa's disappearance, he apparently knew that Hoffa was in danger. According to Chuck Ashman, one of the few reporters close to Hoffa, it was no secret that certain mob leaders were determined to get rid of him.
I think Hoffa was killed by a hitman or hitmen who were hired by the mob out of New Jersey. Hoffa made it very, very plain that when he came back in, he would clean house. But the mobsters that were dealing with Fitzsimmons would be out. There might be other mobsters, but it wouldn't be Fitzsimmons mobsters. And I think that when the word came down from Washington that Hoffa was going to be able to run, since they knew from their own intelligence that he would win, everybody got desperate.
By December of 1975, the FBI had begun to focus its investigation on men who had ties to the East Coast mob. Anthony Provenzano, also known as Tony Pro, had been an inmate at Lewisburg when Hoffa was there. And at some point, while serving time together, the two men reportedly had a falling out. Now, 4 months after Hoffa's disappearance, Provenzano was back in federal custody.
Provenzano was arrested by the FBI at his home in a Miami suburb. He was arraigned before a United States magistrate here before being released on $25,000 bond. He implied to newsmen he's being harassed.
What do you think's behind it all?
I don't know.
You think you're being sort of persecuted?
Persecuted, yeah.
Why?
The persecution, if that's what it was, did not stop there. Provenzano was convicted of a relatively minor felony after his arrest in Florida, but later in 1978 he found himself in far more serious legal trouble.
This week, a jury in the upstate New York city of Kingston convicted former Teamsters official Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano of a 17-year-old murder. Provenzano, long linked to organized crime, is a key suspect in the disappearance of James Hoffa, and the conviction is but the latest example of the heat being put on suspects in the Hoffa case.
The prosecutors have turned to another tactic, using other evidence they dug up against the Hoffa suspects to prosecute them for other crimes. Anthony Provenzano, one of the men Hoffa said he was going to meet on the day he disappeared. Provenzano had an alibi, but he's since been convicted of taking kickbacks and now murder. Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, who is also to have met Hoffa, also had an alibi, convicted of tax evasion. Charles Chucky O'Brien, convicted of accepting a gift from an employer and exaggerating his assets on a loan application. Salvadori's Sally Bugs Bergoglio, allegedly one of the hired hitmen, indicted for kickbacks but murdered before trial.
Mickey Cohen, a former racketeer and a longtime friend of Jimmy Hoffa's, believed that Hoffa was a victim of a breakdown in discipline within the world of organized crime.
When Frank Costello was alive, there was an absolute control. When he was, nobody would get hit unless it was a sit-down discussion or a round-table discussion, and then there was a decision brought down. But those days are long gone, because if anybody in the world certainly didn't deserve to have his lights put out, it was Jimmy Hoffa.
In addition to a lengthy investigation into possible suspects, the FBI also spent months looking for Hoffa's body.
A field 40 miles northwest of Detroit this afternoon was filled with Michigan State troopers and investigators. They were searching and digging for the body of former Teamsters Union President James R. Hoffa. The digging started this evening, but there's no word yet that any trace of Hoffa has been found.
After a day of excited speculation, the FBI announced this afternoon that a skeleton that turned up earlier in the week is not that of Jimmy Hoffa.
There was a search for Hoffa's body in places as far apart as Michigan, New Jersey, and Florida. But they might as well have been digging in Siberia. A wall of silence had descended. Do you think it was professional? That they had to get rid of a body, they had to cover up blood stains, they would have had to act fast. It leads to one conclusion, that whoever did it knew what he was doing.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing. Jimmy Hoffa was done away with, and he's buried in a lime pit.
You say that with a great deal of certainty.
More than you can make book on what I tell you.
Who did it?
I can't answer that.
Do you know?
I can't answer that.
Mickey Cohen's lime pit was only one of dozens of possible locations rumored to be the site of Hoffa's final resting place. One theory holds that his body was dumped in the Florida Everglades. Still another claims that he was buried in the construction site for the New York Giants football stadium in the New Jersey Meadowlands. For the family members he left behind, such speculation only served as a cruel reminder of the enduring mystery they'd had to live with year in and year out since that July day in 1975.
Lord of mercy, I don't think I'll ever find him. But I would like to know what happened. Otherwise, I've got to live with this all my life. In the back of my mind, where is he? And how could he disappear? How? Why?
5 years after her husband's disappearance, Josephine Hoffa died. And 2 years after that, the state of Michigan made official what appeared obvious.
Jimmy Hoffa is legally dead. The once powerful Teamsters boss, who vanished with all the earmarks of gangland precision, is no longer considered missing. A footnote to history that went largely unnoticed today in Michigan, where under state law, 7 years constitute a legal presumption of death.
Jimmy Hoffa's body was never found, and no one was ever indicted for his disappearance.
There's just no answers. There's no answers. There are suspects, but there are no, there's not a prosecutable case.
I want to know what happened to my father. That's the ending that I want. I want to know why, who did it.
It wasn't until July 30th, 1995, 20 years to the day since Hoffa was last seen, that a memorial service was finally held for him in Detroit by his family.
We gather today to remember a great man, my father, James R. Hoffa. Today, there are no monuments erected to Jimmy Hoffa. There is not even a gravestone to mark his resting place. Today, Jimmy Hoffa's long journey ends here in this church. Until I see you again, goodbye, Dad.
When the 20th century returns, we'll take a look at another prominent American who disappeared from public view, but this time by choice. For in the case of the eccentric Howard Hughes, it was his life, far more than his death, that was clouded in mystery.
From director Oliver Stone, Nixon. Golden Globe nominee for Best Actor, Anthony Hopkins. An absolute masterpiece. Anthony Hopkins delivers an Oscar-caliber performance. Newsweek calls it brilliant, compelling, powerful. Siskel and Ebert give it 2 thumbs up. A must-see. Don't miss it.
A man doesn't cry. I don't cry. Just fight.
Nixon, rated R, now playing.
It could be the fastest way to earn miles on most major U.S. airlines since the invention of the jet. Rent a car from Alamo in January, and you can earn up to 3 times the miles you normally earn when you rent from Alamo, or up to 4 times when you use your American Express card. So for a faster way to a free ticket, just ask Alamo, and start earning up to 4 times as many miles. There won't be a faster way to earn them until they start building faster planes.
King of the Jews or King of the Madmen, you decide. Uncover Herod the Great on Ancient Mysteries, tomorrow on A&E.
A&E's monthly magazine opens your eyes to the best in original biographies, mysteries, and specials. From complete highlights, in-depth reviews, and an array of collectibles, to fascinating articles, up-close interviews, even the challenge of a crossword. A&E Monthly is your connection to what's happening today. To order your 12 issues of the A&E Monthly for only $18 a year, 23 Canadian dollars, call 1-800-238-2800.
In this month's issue, John Goodman, Roseanne, Shakespeare, he can yabba dabba do anything, plus Super Bowl history and a guide to the best movies. Order now, and with your paid subscription, receive Liberace Unplugged from Foundation Records.
Call 1-800-238-2800 for an engaging look at television's best.
Howard Hughes was one of the strangest men who ever lived. Although he was wealthy, innovative, adventurous, what set Hughes apart from other men was his neurotic need for isolation. During the last 2 decades of his life, this morbidly reclusive man sealed himself off from almost all human contact. But for Hughes, the supreme irony was that the more deeply he buried himself in seclusion, the more he aroused the curiosity of the national media. For it was precisely his desperate craving for privacy that made him such a compelling public figure, right up to the moment his weird life came to an end on that April day in 1976.
Howard Hughes is dead at the age of 70, with members of his entourage saying that he suffered a stroke and died while aboard a chartered ambulance jet on a flight from Acapulco, Mexico to Houston.
But Hughes had been such a mysterious figure that even his death aroused suspicion.
My guess is he died a long time before anybody was ever told that Howard Hughes died.
Even officials in Washington had their doubts.
The federal government is apparently not completely satisfied that the man who died on his way to Houston's Methodist Hospital was indeed billionaire Howard Hughes. Fingerprints were taken in Houston and are being forwarded to the FBI for positive identification.
When it was finally confirmed that the report of Hughes' death was accurate, one of his Las Vegas associates was quick to grasp the irony. It is tragic, he said, that Howard Hughes had to die to prove that he was alive. But if the end of his life was tragic, there had been plenty of glittering triumphs along the way. From the beginning, there had been money to burn. And beyond his wealth, Hughes also inherited from his father his gift for invention.
It all started in the oil fields of Texas with a revolutionary new drilling bit invented by Hughes' father, an immense moneymaker, cornerstone of Howard Hughes' fortune. Hughes branched out into aviation, making millions. Hughes Aircraft became the nation's 9th largest defense contractor, turning out weaponry, electronics, satellites.
Hughes Aircraft, however, didn't always enjoy comfortable relations with Washington. The Senate investigated charges that Hughes Aircraft had been given huge government contracts during World War II only after Hughes, through his PR man John Meyer, had bestowed favors on high-ranking officials. When he was summoned before a committee hearing, Hughes was in a testy and defiant mood.
Senator, may I ask a question? Well, now, if you'll just wait till I issue a subpoena for Mr. Mars, I've asked you whether or not you would produce him, and you said you didn't know, as I understand it.
I don't remember if that was my answer.
Well, what was your answer?
I don't remember. Get it off the record.
Well, now, Mr. Hughes, I'm asking you what your answer was. And we're not going to have this bickering back and forth. You are before this committee, and you're going to answer the question.
You asked me just now about a reply that I made. My answer is I don't remember. Now, the man is...
Well, I'll ask you again.
What?
Will you bring Mr. Mars in at the 2 o'clock session?
No, I don't think I will.
Will you try to bring him in?
Oh, I don't think I'll try.
At the heart of the controversy was Hughes' most extravagant invention, a gigantic airplane built of plywood designed to carry troops and cargo during World War II, nicknamed the Spruce Goose. By the time the 8-engine flying boat was finally assembled, the war was over. But Hughes believed in the Spruce Goose, and he hotly resented criticism that building it had been a huge waste of taxpayers' money.
I put the sweat of my life into this thing. I have my reputation rolled up in it, and I have stated several times that if it's a failure, I'll probably leave this country and never come back, and I mean it.
70 feet off the water, she stays for a mile. $23 million worth of airplane has answered a lot of committee questions. It can fly.
Well, yes, it could fly, but that 1-mile flight was the last time the Spruce Goose was airborne. Soon thereafter, it was mothballed in a hangar in Long Beach, California. Hughes' other major enthusiasm during this period was the movie industry. One of the first movies he produced, Hell's Angels, introduced Jean Harlow to the world. And another, The Outlaw, featured the debut of an actress he personally discovered, Jane Russell. When the latter film was released, Hughes was denounced for his excessive attention to Miss Russell's bosom.
Be careful, your wound, you'll hurt yourself.
Although he was known to be extremely shy, that did not prevent Hughes from pursuing an active and highly public social life.
You know, he was like James Bond and Clark Gable, and you didn't know who he was exactly. And there was this fascination with this, probably the most glamorous man in America.
In 1966, Hughes trained his financial guns on America's gaudiest playground, Las Vegas. In no time at all, he bought so many hotels and casinos and other choice properties that he became known as the Baron of Nevada.
He was holed up in the Desert Inn, and he was an insomniac. So he'd watch television all night, and he didn't like the movies they played. So he bought the television station so he would play the movies he wanted. Now, how could you not be fascinated by a guy like that? And the whole world was.
By 1970, he'd become a mystery man, a recluse, and stories soon began to spread about his fear of germs and about his other phobias, too.
There was this guy, and he was supposed to have fingernails out to here, and he walked around in Kleenex boxes because he had a thing about cleanliness, and he wouldn't let his feet touch the floor, and he was supposed to have a long beard. And Morley Saber and I decided we'd go to Vegas and look for Hughes. We did a story called One of Our Billionaires is Missing.
And it was to here 4 years ago that Howard Hughes came. In what seemed a matter of days, he laid claim to the city and the state. Up there in the penthouse suite of the Desert Inn Hotel, he cut himself off from the rest of the world. Total, absolute seclusion. But the kingdom quietly thrived until last November, when Hughes, now 65, stopped roaming the penthouse. He fell ill, desperately ill.
It was shortly after published reports of Hughes' illness that he had a public falling out with Robert Mayhew, the man who had been running his Nevada operation. To complicate matters further, Hughes abruptly pulled up stakes and left Las Vegas.
His Nevada investment is estimated at $300 million, and longtime associates in the parent Hughes Tool Company, which has one stockholder, Howard Hughes, have fired the Nevada operations chief, Robert Mayhew. But he refuses to accept being fired, claiming legal documents bearing Hughes' signature are forgeries.
Mayhew's refusal to resign, coupled with Hughes' quick Las Vegas departure, raised questions about his health and indeed his safety. Hughes had decided to act.
Last night, in the middle of the night at 1:30 a.m., Hughes himself called Las Vegas to set the record straight. He talked with the district attorney and with Nevada Governor Paul Laxalt.
He wanted to dispel any rumors to the effect he'd been kidnapped. He said, I left freely and voluntarily and had a very pleasurable trip. He wanted to dispel any rumors about his not feeling well. I said, I feel fine.
What did he say on the subject of Mr. Mayhew's dismissal and the whole matter of turmoil here, really?
Well, he wanted me to personally know that the document they had, which consists basically of a proxy and power of attorney, was valid, that the signature was genuine.
But Mayhew continued to challenge the decision and to insist that the order to fire him had not come from Hughes.
This is so unlike Mr. Hughes.
But you never met him?
That is correct. I have seen him.
That's rather unusual for a business relationship.
It is not unusual in the Hughes world. There are many of his top executives who have been with him for 25 plus years who have never seen Mr. Hughes.
The dispute between Mayhew and the Hughes Tool Company was eventually settled out of court. And once that controversy died down, the public lost interest in Howard Hughes and the strange way he chose to conduct his business. After leaving Las Vegas, he set up his new headquarters in another hotel sanctuary, this time in the Bahamas. And there, for the next year or so, he lived in relative peace and solitude, undisturbed by intrusions from the outside world. But that tranquility was dramatically shattered in early 1972 when Hughes became the subject of a brazen literary hoax that scandalized two of America's most respected publishing institutions. That story and the rest of the Howard Hughes saga when the 20th century continues.
Enterprise,
Hi, I'm at the repair shop. I need to rent a car.
Enterprise will arrange to pick you up,
This is great.
drive you to our place, and get you on your way. Pick Enterprise. We'll pick you up.
With every generation that has passed us by,
Long live the cause of freedom.
and every event that has shaped who we are, comes the awareness that history lives in all of us. Pick a time, choose a place, and escape to where the past comes alive. Call your cable operator and ask them to carry the History Channel.
To all retailers of projection TV sets, please discourage direct comparison of our sets with the Toshiba Theater View. Guess you'll rate this. We do not yet have the combination of picture quality, true home theater sound, and overall value of Theater View. Where's my typewriter? Place our sets as far away as possible from the Toshiba Theater View, period.
Our competition won't go near the Toshiba Theater View, because compared to Theater View, everything else is just a big TV.
0% financing, no interest, no payments till February 97. See your Toshiba dealer for details.
For years, they couldn't hear what they were playing. They couldn't hear what they were singing.
Their magical mystery tour started in Liverpool, invaded America, and ended at Abbey Road. But their ticket to ride had a price.
They were living, they felt, as captives.
Were they prisoners of their own fame?
The Beatles are more popular than Jesus now.
The Beatles on Biography, tomorrow at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific, only on A&E.
Miramax Films is proud to present the one motion picture triumph President Nelson Mandela calls a monument to the future. Tremendously moving. Magnificent. James Earl Jones and Richard Harris both give Oscar-worthy performances.
There is something between you and me.
A soaring testament to the power of the human spirit. Cry, the Beloved Country. Rated PG-13. Now in select cities, starts January 12th everywhere.
Now get 24 issues of the new New Yorker week after week for just $19.98. Save $40 off the cover price and get the special cartoon collection free with your paid subscription. Call 1-800-445-3883.
His name was Clifford Irving, and like other authors who live on the fringe of fame and fortune, he dreamed of coming up with a big book, a blockbuster that would storm the bestseller lists and establish his reputation. In January of 1972, he seemed to be on the verge of achieving that dream. Irving claimed to be the co-author of a candid and authorized autobiography by Howard Hughes, a subject so fascinating that it promised to be the literary event of the season.
I must say, Clifford Irving's a pretty smart guy. I mean, he wrote a pretty good book. He almost got away with it.
Irving's publisher certainly had no doubt that the book was authentic. To acquire it, McGraw-Hill had paid Hughes $650,000, a very hefty book advance in those days. And the checks, endorsed by an H.R. Hughes, had been deposited in a Swiss bank. But then came chaos. Hughes agreed to a telephone press conference to charge that the whole thing was a fraud. It reminded him, he said, of a plot for a lurid Hollywood movie.
I only wish I was still in the movie business because I don't remember any scripts as wild or as stretching of the imagination as this yarn has turned out to be. I'm not talking about the biography itself because I've never read it. I don't know what's in it, but I mean, this episode is just so fantastic that it taxes your imagination to believe that a thing like this could happen.
I take it, sir, you do not know a man named Clifford Irving, then?
No, I never saw him. I never even heard of him until a matter of days ago when this thing first came to my attention.
But Clifford Irving refused to back down. When I interviewed him a few days later, he insisted the fraud being foisted on the American public was not his book, but the Hughes telephone press conference.
The author, Clifford Irving, says the voice on the telephone a week ago was not Howard Hughes. He has produced 2 letters allegedly handwritten to him by Howard Hughes, authorizing him to proceed with the biography. Handwriting experts certify that it is indeed Hughes' handwriting. And Irving says that he met with Hughes many times over many months in Mexico, Puerto Rico, Florida, and the Bahamas to tape the reminiscences that formed the book. When you last saw him, what did he look like?
Hughes is a man almost as tall as I am, 6'3".
Weighs?
Under 140 pounds.
Is he a good-looking man, still?
He has the good looks of a man who once was extremely handsome and has dignity in his face.
Does he wear a beard?
Not a real one. Not a real one. What I mean is he has on occasion worn false beards and false mustaches and wigs.
With you?
Mike, I said there's a James Bond setup here that's out of the worst possible detective novel you could ever read.
I asked why hadn't the real Howard Hughes come forward to verify his collaboration with Irving.
I've said, Howard, speak up. Call off the dogs. I've written him a letter to the only address that I have at the moment that I know is valid, and I've used the correct code words for identification. And if he gets that letter, which apparently he hasn't so far, I presume he will surface. I don't know why he hasn't surfaced. It puzzles me, it upsets me, it distresses me.
Clifford Irving was a convincing liar, and at first his defiant claim to authenticity was firmly supported by both McGraw-Hill and Life magazine, which had purchased the right to publish excerpts from the book.
It turned out, later on, that the whole Clifford Irving thing was a hoax.
The checks for $650,000 had indeed been endorsed by an H.R. Hughes, but it was later disclosed that they had been deposited in the Swiss bank under the name of Helga R. Hughes, who turned out to be Clifford Irving's wife, Edith.
He got unmasked, and we got taken.
In other words, the Irving book was a total fraud, and within a month after our interview, he was in deep trouble with the law.
Irving refused to comment directly on the news reports of his exchanges with federal prosecutors.
When you see the paper reports, what goes through your mind? Is there any particular thing?
Yeah, I haven't got the slightest idea who they're writing about.
Irving was later convicted of fraud and sentenced to 2.5 years in prison.
I suppose there's larceny and it's that kind of adventure in all of us. I just was damn fool enough to act on it.
But the end of the Irving affair only seemed to ignite a media frenzy to try to get an interview with Hughes at his hotel hideaway in the Bahamas. Or, failing that, at least a close-up picture of the man who had not been seen in public since the late 1950s.
Had we ever found him, we would have jumped through hoops to get him on the air.
By mid-February 1972, the media's persistent presence at his hotel convinced Hughes he had no choice but to make another getaway.
The first news of Hughes' departure from the Bahamas came when a television producer vacationing in the same hotel happened on the furniture. Don Hewitt is executive producer of the CBS News program 60 Minutes.
I figure, aha, I have a great entree to this guy. I write a note to have sent up to him,
telling him that I'd spent a lot of time with Clifford Irving, and that if he was curious about Irving, I could probably fill him in on what kind of guy he was.
Never got an answer. But I figured, well, I'll go up there. So I get in the elevator, and by God, the door opens on the 8th floor, and I figure, that's crazy. I mean, I thought it was all secret passwords and code words and everything else. And I get off the elevator, and that hall is loaded with moving men.
Moving everything out of that Hughes suite at the end of the hall. Most notably, a hospital bed, a stanchion of sorts that holds plasma bottles, electric blankets, electric heaters, 50 or 60 cartons of personal belongings, desks, furniture.
I mean, it was all of this junk was coming out of there, and a hospital bed. And I said to myself, if he's so sick that he needs a hospital bed, why isn't he in it?
So I put two and two together, tried to get on the freight elevator, was told by a guard to get out of here. I had no business up here.
Was it all a charade? I think so. Was he ever there? I don't believe so.
Howard Hughes now became the world's wealthiest vagabond. From the Bahamas, he flew to Nicaragua.
The hotel shows no outward signs of housing a famous guest. There is no visible security. The only thing that is known for certain is that Hughes is in Managua. Or is he?
Hughes was in Managua, but he stayed there only a few weeks. First he went to Vancouver, then back to Nicaragua. And then in late 1972 he moved again, this time to London.
The Inn on the Park, Mr. Hughes' London hideaway, is not allowing non-residents into the elevators. But if one is very sneaky and a little lucky, one can wind up on the top floor and find a sealed-off corridor, a peephole, a buzzer which no one answers, and eventually a security officer.
Well, if you're not residents, your trespassers up on this floor. And the police will be called and you'll be arrested as trespassers.
Undaunted, newsmen have been staking out the hotel night and day. London's papers seem rather amused by the affair.
I mean, you always got stories from a busboy. I once saw him going through the kitchen of a hotel, but you never knew whether to believe it. You never knew whether he was dead or alive at this point.
The media circus of hot pursuit eventually burned itself out, and Hughes finally settled down in Mexico to the life of solitude that was so essential to him. Hughes' last years were a misery in isolation.
This is where Howard Hughes spent his final mysterious days. The Princess Hotel in Acapulco, Mexico. This is the view Howard Hughes would have seen had he wanted. Instead, he chose to keep the windows sealed by black curtains and masking tape.
His fear of germs had become such an extreme phobia that he reportedly almost never left his bed. In the end, it was kidney failure that caused Hughes' death.
It was on this plane coming back to Houston that he died. A charter jet which flew him here from Acapulco yesterday. Aboard, his two personal physicians fought desperately to save his life. Apart from them, the last to see Hughes alive were the charter pilots.
He looked almost dead when he boarded the airplane, you know, because his eyes were wide open and there was really very little life at all, if any, left in him.
As we were taxiing into the customs ramp, the doctor in the back said, just take your time. There's no need to hurry any longer.
Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire known to millions, was buried just after sunrise today in his hometown as a handful of people watched.
In life, his movements about the world were always kept secret. And in death, too, the day and time of his funeral was secret. The body was taken to Glenwood Cemetery, near the old downtown section of Houston. The metal casket weighed nearly a half-ton. Hughes, the medical report said, weighed only 90 pounds. The burial site was next to his mother and father in the family plot. In all, only 16 came here to mourn.
We brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away.
The entire service lasted just 7 minutes. Little emotion showed among those who came to pay their last respects. The casket covered by a steel vault. Most of the mourners left before it was lowered into the ground. The grave will be unmarked. There will be no headstone. Howard Hughes achieving in death the anonymity he tried so hard for in life.
Yet anonymity was something he could not achieve even in death. The vast fortune he left behind became the object of disputes every bit as confusing and bitter as those Hughes had provoked during his lifetime.
A lawyer said today that Utah gas station attendant Melvin Dumar has admitted delivering to Mormon church headquarters a purported Howard Hughes will that left him millions of dollars.
Dumar claimed that Hughes had left him millions of dollars because he had given Hughes a ride one night in the desert.
Melvin Dumar is a man on the spot. He has now admitted he was the one who delivered the so-called Mormon will to the church's headquarters in Salt Lake City, explaining he never mentioned it before in fear he'd be suspected of forging the document, a fear that's come true.
More than 2 years after Hughes' death, the Las Vegas jury declared the Mormon will a forgery. But the legal bickering among Hughes' relatives and other would-be beneficiaries continued for years to come. The confusion over the Hughes estate was the direct result of the mysterious way the man chose to handle his affairs, and to the very end, Howard Hughes was so secretive about his great fortune that he declined to make it clear who he wanted to inherit it. Some final thoughts about Jimmy Hoffa and Howard Hughes and the questions they left unanswered when the 20th century returns.
Aptiva from IBM. Welcome to the future.
Let me guess. One side of you craves easy chair comfort, while the other side itches for performance, right? Well, meet Buick Regal, with its famous 3800 V6 engine and Grand Touring suspension. Add to that an all-new interior with body-sensitive seats. And finally, there's a car for the two of you. Buick Regal.
237 on the ground, gate 15.
All right, guys, we got a 34-minute turnaround on this one. Let's do it.
It can be 5 below zero or coming down in buckets. It doesn't matter. It doesn't buy you another second out here. From the minute that plane touches down to the minute it takes off, we're on.
Let's get a few more shots on 815.
The whole crew. And there's no time to waste. But time isn't everything. Getting the job done right is.
Okay, I'm locking up the line.
So everybody pulls their weight. Everyone knows the drill. And we realize passengers don't really see this.
Have a late bag on your way, Bob.
No problem, Jerry. I'll take care of it.
Heck, it's a rare moment when they see us at all. But not a second goes by that we're not looking out for them.
479er coming in 11 minutes early.
One of the most loved novels of all time comes to television. Pride and Prejudice is special, magnificent and hilarious. A triumph and a real treat.
Beautiful.
An outstanding miniseries with something for everyone. An A&E original, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, beginning January 14th, only on A&E.
Although they were contemporaries, Jimmy Hoffa and Howard Hughes had little in common. Hoffa was a street fighter who battled his way up through the ranks of America's toughest labor union. He was also a garrulous man who loved to play to the crowd. In contrast, Hughes, born to wealth, was so painfully shy that he shunned the limelight even when his business ventures took him to such glitzy playgrounds as Hollywood and Las Vegas. But for all their differences in background and personality, these two ambitious and powerful men shared a similar destiny that made them objects of fascination. Both were caught up in mysteries that were never solved. We'll never know why, in his early 50s, Howard Hughes chose to embrace the life of a neurotic hermit. For instead of talking about the fears and anxieties that drove him into isolation, he took all those dark secrets with him to the grave. As for Jimmy Hoffa, his disappearance was so complete and uncompromising that even the sight of his grave remains a mystery. I'm Mike Wallace, and this is the 20th Century.
Now available from A&E Home Video, 20th Century with Mike Wallace. Re-examine some of the significant events of this century and see how they will continue to affect our future. Call 1-800-423-1212. And for $99.95 plus shipping and handling, you can own this collector's set. 11 episodes on 5 video cassettes of 20th Century with Mike Wallace. Call now, 1-800-423-1212.
This is Mike Wallace. The science of solving crime, from DNA fingerprints to fiber analysis. Detectives of Death on an all-new 20th Century.
Next Wednesday, only on A&E.
From cyberspace to forensic science to virtual reality, explore new worlds of tomorrow's technology in today's innovations. Voyages moves to 10 Eastern, 11 Pacific tomorrow. Now, Detectives Briscoe and Logan hunt down a serial killer. Law and Order is next on A&E.
A&E's The 20th Century has been brought to you in part by Buick and your local dealers. Remember Buick, the new symbol for quality in America.